The Sorvan Imperium had ruled for so long that it no longer remembered how to be afraid. And Varun understood, standing in the great tiered hall of the High Council, that this was exactly the problem. He was a low analyst. He knew his place. He had spent 4 cycles compiling a report on the species that called themselves human, and he had come to the hall to read it aloud, and he had watched the faces of the council members change from patience to boredom, to something worse than boredom. He had reached the part where he recommended caution. He had used the word twice. Caution! In the language of the Sorvan, it was a small word, a word for merchants and cowards, and when he said it the second time, High Commander Saravan made the hard clicking sound that passed for laughter among their kind. Caution! Saravan repeated, and the whole hall relaxed, because if the High Commander was amused, then the analyst had said something foolish, and there was nothing to fear. You want us to be cautious of a species that bakes bread on its border stations, that builds schools at the edge of the dock and fills them with young analysts. They are children playing at Empire. We were crossing star systems before they learned to make fire. Varun lowered his report. He did not argue. You did not argue with Saravan, but he had read every scrap of human history the Imperium had gathered, and he had noticed a thing the others had not bothered to notice, which was that, in all of that history, the humans had never once started a war. They had finished several. That was a different sentence, and it had kept him awake. He said none of this. He sat down. The hall moved on to other matters, and the matter of the humans was declared closed, and Varun folded his report and thought, without any drama, only a quiet certainty that felt like cold water, that he had just watched a mistake being made that could not be taken back. He was right. He was only wrong about the scale. Far out along the ragged edge of what the humans called their space, there was a station named Bell Rock, and a Sorvan reconnaissance drone had been watching it for 11 days. The drone sent back images without judgment, because drones do not judge, and the images showed a small, warm thing floating in an enormous cold. Nothing. Bell Rock was not a fortress. It had 2 rail batteries and a missile grid that was years overdue for its refit, and a garrison of 40 soldiers whose chief complaint, week to week, was the quality of the coffee. 612 people lived there. Scientists, engineers, dockhands, families. There was a school with 24 children in it, none older than 11. There was a medical bay and a bakery, and the bakery made real bread somehow out here at the end of everything, and the smell of it in the mornings had a way of making people forget where they were. Saravan looked at the drone images the way a man looks at a weed pushing up through the stones of his courtyard. Mild irritation, hardening. He was young for his rank, not yet 2 centuries, which, among the Sorvan, meant ambitious in the way that got other people killed. He had brought his argument to the council with charts and clean language that made a violent thing sound sensible. Human expansion had reached the 3rd zone of Imperium influence. Left alone, in 40 years they would be pressing against Sorvan space itself. Better to draw the line now. Better to draw it early, and clearly, and where it could be seen. A single strike on a small civilian station. Yes, civilian. That was the point of it. You did not send a message by destroying a warship. Warships understood force already. You sent a message by showing that there were places the humans simply did not go, and that the cost of learning otherwise would be paid by the ones who had not even fought. The council had approved it. 188 warships now fell out of fold space at the edge of the Bell Rock system, one and then in clusters, dropping back into the ordinary universe like stones through still water. They were dark and long and built like weapons, every line of them designed by minds that had never learned to tell the difference between a tool and a threat. On Bell Rock, the proximity alarm went off, and Commander Naomi Calder set down her coffee and walked to the command deck without hurrying. Because hurrying was a habit she had trained out of herself a long time ago. She had been the station's commanding officer for 2 years, 4 months, and 9 days. She kept the count. Not because she was unhappy, she was not, but because she believed a person should know exactly where they stood in time, and exactly what they were responsible for. She was 46, lean, dark-eyed, gray, coming through her cropped hair that she had never bothered to hide. She had served in the Sarnath conflict before this posting, and she had seen what a war looked like up close. And she had decided somewhere in those years that the finest thing a soldier could do was keep war away from the people who had never asked for any of it. Lieutenant Devi Rao was already at her station when Calder came in, hands moving, face very still. How many contacts? I'm still counting. That was the first thing that tightened something in Calder's chest. When it was debris, you did not count. You estimated. Give me a number. Rao looked up. Over 100. Closer to 2. Calder stood beside her and read the screen and felt the shape of it settle into place. She had seen Sorvan hulls once, years ago, at a summit when she had stood on a platform and taken the hand of a Sorvan envoy. A hard chitinous thing with too many joints in it, and thought, these are not people who negotiate from weakness. The Sorvan were old the way that made humans feel raw and new. There had been incidents lately. A mining platform gone dark in the Sarnath Nebula. A Sorvan patrol, crossing into declared human space, and, when hailed, turning around without a single word. The channels had been tense, but no one had said the word war out loud because no one had believed it needed saying. The count finished. 188. Bellrock had 40 soldiers and 2 rail batteries. Open a channel, Calder said. Rao opened it. Calder spoke clearly, without heat. Sorvan Fleet, this is Commander Naomi Calder of the human outpost, Bellrock. You are in declared human space. Identify your intentions and respond. A breath. We are a civilian station. We are not a military target. Silence. She said it again in Galactic Common, the trade tongue every void-faring species shared, her accent imperfect and her words very clear. The fleet kept coming. She had perhaps 4 minutes before they were in range, and she spent them the way she did everything, in order, without waste. The first minute she spent trying the channel twice more. The second minute she spent doing the arithmetic on what 188 ships could do to a place built for science and living and the baking of bread. The third minute she spent making certain the 24 children from the school were moved down into the core of the station, into the blast-shielded maintenance tunnels where the water processors hummed and the walls were thickest. The fourth minute she spent at the emergency console, where there were 2 beacons. One was the yellow beacon, general distress. Something has gone wrong, send help. The other was red, and it had a formal name in the manual that no one used because everyone who had ever worked a border station knew what it was really called. They called it the Last Testimony. The Last Testimony did not ask for help. It did not plead. It transmitted everything, all sensor data, all counts, all approach vectors, all identifications, a live feed of whatever was happening over 17 redundant frequencies that nothing could jam on a tight beam aimed at the relay at Corabel and past it at Earth. It had been built by people who understood that sometimes a station did not survive long enough for help to matter, and who had decided that in those cases the least they could do, the very least, was make sure that someone knew. Calder rested 2 fingers on the red key. She held them there for the length of one slow breath, the way you might rest your hand on a door before you open it onto something you cannot unsee. Then she pressed it, and the Sorvan opened fire. Private Jonah Vance had been a soldier for 16 months. He was 23. He had grown up in a river town where the summers were long, and his grandmother had taught him to fold dumplings with his thumbs, and he had meant to be a builder of bridges before he passed a recruitment board at a rail station one afternoon and, for reasons he could never afterward explain to himself, walked in. He was at his post on the South Rail Battery when the first volley broke against the station's outer shields, and the whole platform rang like a struck pot, and he took the rail in both hands and looked out through the armored port and saw light. Not starlight, fire, dense blue-white pulses, coming from every direction at once, as though they had always been there and the dark had only been waiting to show him. His headset crackled. Sergeant Lena Braun. South Battery, lead ship, fire at will. He fired. The rail kicked. A tungsten slug the length of his forearm left the barrel fast enough to make the air around it briefly wrong. A shimmer, a wound in the light, and it crossed to the nearest Sorvan hull. in a fraction of a heartbeat, and struck a small bloom of venting atmosphere off its flank. A scratch. He fired again. And again. The Sorvan did not fight the way humans fought. Human warships moved, they danced, they used speed and angle, and the empty dark as a weapon of its own. The Sorvan came on in a line, in a wall. The front ships took fire and held and returned it, and the ships behind moved up to fill any gap the moment a gap appeared. It was not tactics, it was geometry. The patient geometry of a thing that has decided another thing should stop existing and is simply doing the arithmetic of it. The outer habitat ring took a hit that vented 2 sections to the void. Bulkheads slammed. The medical bay lost main power and dropped to backup. A comm tower cracked at its base and drifted off, turning slowly, its lights still on. Vance kept firing, and he noticed with a distant part of his mind that his hands were steady. He had always assumed that when the moment came, his hands would shake. They did not. They simply did what he had trained them to do, and that quiet part of him watched and felt something that was not pride and not grief and had no name he owned. The North Battery went dark. He knew it by the silence where Corporal Adeyemi's voice had been, calling targets, and then nothing. He was the last gun. Commander Calder's voice came over the general channel. She did not shout. She spoke the way she always spoke, level and plain, as if she were reading out a weather report. All personnel, this is Commander Calder. The station cannot hold. Non-combat personnel to the pods. Soldiers, you have done everything that could be done. And I am proud of every one of you. A pause. This is not the end. This is a message, and it has already been sent. Vance understood at once what she meant, and something in his chest went very still. He fired the south rail 3 more times before a Sorvan pulse found the battery's power coupling and the gun died in his hands. He sat a moment in the dark and the sudden quiet with nothing left to fire, and through the port he could see the Sorvan hulls close now, enormous, filling the place where the stars had been. He picked up his rifle. He went to find the others. Far above, in the flagship at the center of the Sorvan formation, an analyst named Varun watched the same battle on a tactical feed and could not make his instincts go quiet. He had talked his way onto this deployment. He had told himself it was to observe, to gather data, to be right in a way the Council could not wave off next time. That was half of it. The other half was a feeling he did not have a clean Sorvan word for. A feeling that he needed to see the thing he had failed to prevent, so that he would never be able to pretend he had not seen it. What he saw troubled him, and it was not the human weapons, which were brave and small and losing. It was the humans themselves. He had expected panic on their channels, the ragged noise of a species dying badly. Instead, their transmissions were calm, ordered. He listened to a woman's voice move through her tasks one after another, unhurried, and something in the back of his mind, the old animal part that had kept his ancestors alive on a harder world, said very quietly, "That is not the voice of someone who has lost. That is the voice of someone who is finishing." He brought it to Saravan. He said, carefully, "High Commander, their command channel. They are not afraid. They are recording." Saravan did not look away from the wreckage on his screen. Everything dies recording, analyst. It changes nothing. It was the second time he had waved Varun off, and Varun marked it, the way you mark a stone you have tripped on so as not to trip again. On Bell Rock, the last testimony fed everything home. Every ship count, every vector, every frequency, Saravan's fleet was using, streaming out on 17 channels toward the relay at Korabel. And Naomi Calder stayed at the command deck and narrated it, flat and exact, while the station came apart around her. "Sorvan boarding elements are cutting the primary lock," she said. "Teams of 6. Energy weapons, short range. They are not taking prisoners." A pause. The sound of tearing metal growing behind her. "They appear to be searching for something. I don't know what." Another pause. Bell Rock to Earth Command. "We are down. My name is Naomi Calder. I am 46 years old. This station was not a military target." Her voice did not change at all. "Remember that. Remember us. The signal ran clean for another 9 seconds. Then it stopped. The escape pods launched a minute before the boarders reached the core. 36 of them, spinning away in every direction, small white seeds thrown into the dark, carrying the ones who had reached the bays in time. Children, scientists. The station baker, clutching a sack of flour, for a reason she would never be able to explain, and that made perfect sense to her in the moment. Some soldiers, not all. The Sorvan did not fire on the pods. This was noticed afterward by everyone who ever studied Belrock. The Sorvan let them go. It was read in a dozen ways. Some said it proved the Sorvan had limits. Some said it was calculated, that Saravan wanted witnesses, that a message needs living mouths to carry it. Some said the pods were simply too small to be worth a shot. All of them were guessing. Saravan himself, watching the little pods scatter, felt a flicker of something almost like generosity and mistook it for strength. He thought, let them run home and tell the others what they saw. He did not understand yet that he had just handed the humans exactly what a last testimony was built to carry. Not a plea, a record, and he had let it walk out the door. His communications officer brought him the after-action report. 188 ships deployed, 0 Sorvan casualties. The outpost was gone. He composed his message to Earth Command himself, precise and formal, the way diplomatic communication demanded. It stated in Galactic Common that the Sorvan Imperium considered the matter of the Belrock sector closed, that any further human presence in the third zone would be treated as aggression, and that the Imperium hoped this clear demonstration of intent would allow both species to proceed in a spirit of mutual understanding. He was pleased with the phrase, mutual understanding. It implied equals. He thought it was almost generous. He sent it and settled in to wait for the human reply, which he expected to be formal and perhaps angry, and certainly weak. Humans were not a warrior people, not truly. They built, they traded, they expanded. They had never fought a war on the scale the Sorvan had fought in their long early centuries. When pressed, they talked. He was confident they would talk. 7 light years out, on a cold moon orbiting a gas giant, the relay at Korabel caught the last testimony with a dish the width of a small city, flagged it, and threw it onward on a tight beam relay that would reach Earth in just under 9 hours. And in a building in New Lucerne, with no windows on its outer walls and a name that appeared on no public registry, a man named Director Carl Vanten was woken at 2 in the morning. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment in the dark. Then he dressed. Then he walked a long corridor to a room with 1 table and 1 screen, and he read the report, and he watched the sensor feed, and he watched the count of 188 ships and the 40 guns that had answered them, and he sat with it for a long time. Then he lifted a phone that held only 1 number, a phone that had not been used in the 19 years he had held his office. It rang once. A voice answered, and said nothing at all. It only waited. "Activate the Keystone Protocol," Vanten said. The voice on the other end of the line said, "Confirmed. Time of activation logged. And somewhere 3 jumps from Earth, on a moon that no chart bothered to name." The lights began to come on. Not slowly, all at once. The moon was called Harrow, and from the outside it looked like every other dead rock in the galaxy, gray and cratered under a haze of dust that never quite settled. If you flew past it, your instruments would show you nothing worth a second glance, which was the entire point. The masking array buried beneath its surface had cost more to build than the whole economy of some worlds, and it did its work perfectly. From the outside, nothing. From the inside, Harrow was the most dangerous place in the known galaxy, and when the 4 words came down the line, every light in the facility came up together, and every person who worked there stopped what they were doing and stood still for exactly 1 second. Not because they were ordered to, because they all understood, in the same instant, what those words meant. They had trained for this for years. Some had given whole careers to it, waiting for a signal they had quietly prayed would never arrive. Now it had arrived, and for 1 second they were still. Then they moved. Admiral Nathan Rowe was 61. He had commanded the Keystone Fleet for 7 years, and before that, a carrier group in the Sarnath conflict. 2 engagements the histories called decisive and he called expensive. He was a tall man, broad across the shoulders, with a face that looked carved by someone who cared more for use than beauty. His officers said he had two expressions, thinking and decided, and they were not wrong. He was already awake when the activation came through, already dressed because the first sensor data off the Corabel relay had reached him 40 minutes earlier, and he had known, reading it, what was coming. He had not slept. He had sat in the command center with a cup of black coffee going cold and watched the numbers and waited. When the confirmation came, he set the cup down. All hands. His voice carried without effort, the voice of a man who had given orders in loud rooms for 30 years. Keystone Protocol is active. This is not a drill. Begin pre-launch on all ships. Full drive diagnostics in 40 minutes. Navigation has coordinates. Weapons crews to stations. No one cheered. No one spoke except to confirm. The room filled with the clatter of keys and boots and the low waking hum of systems that had never once run outside a test. Rowe walked to the main port. Below him, in caverns cut from Harrow's rock over 21 years, the fleet sat in rows. 44 warships, not the largest ships humanity had ever built, and that was not the point of them. They were not carriers, not troop haulers, not the kind of vessel made to hold ground. Each was wrapped in a hull alloy, listed in no published registry. Each carried weapon systems that appeared in no arms treaty because humanity had never told anyone the systems existed. Each had a fold drive that could cross 12 light-years in a single jump, which was, by a wide margin, faster than anything any species had ever put in space. The galaxy knew humans were quick. It did not know how quick. That, too, had been on purpose. The building of it had a beginning. And the beginning was a woman. After the Sarnath conflict, a quiet review had been ordered, run by an admiral named Cora Whitfield, who had since retired and gone to keep bees on a hillside and refused all visitors. Her review asked one question, and only one. If a species with far greater military strength than anything humanity had yet met decided one day to erase human civilization, what would humanity do about it? The honest answer, before the review, was not much. Whitfield had found that answer unacceptable. She did not take her conclusions to the public. She took them to a room with no recording devices and 3 people in it, and what she said was simple. Humanity was expanding. Expansion made contact. Contact across all of history did not always go well. And humanity was, by the measure of the species it was now meeting, young, raw, and vulnerable in ways it did not yet grasp. She proposed a thing with no public name, called internally the doctrine of consequence, and its logic was very old. It was the logic of the deterrent, carried out into the dark, between stars. You did not build the weapon to use it. You built it so that using it would never be necessary. You built it, and you told no one you had it, and you maintained it, and you hoped with everything in you that it would gather dust forever. But you built it capable. You built it so that if the worst day ever came, there would be no hesitation, no long war, no window in which an enemy might do the math and decide they could absorb your answer and come out ahead. The answer had to be final, and it had to be fast, faster than an enemy could adapt or scatter or evacuate, so that the whole galaxy would understand in a single clear and terrible hour that attacking humanity was not a gamble with a bad outcome. It was simply an ending. 47 minutes after Carl Vanten made his call, Rowe walked onto the bridge of his flagship, the Verdict, which had never once left Harrow, and gave the order to launch. 44 ships lifted out of the rock, oriented, and began to spin up their drives, and the space around each of them started to do the thing that fold drives do to space, a shivering in the light like heat haze over summer stone, except cold. The technicians who stayed behind sat at their stations and watched the fleet go. Some of them had worked on Harrow for a decade and had never seen all 44 move at once. Some of them wept. All of them understood that they were watching the answer leave. Across the galaxy, others noticed. The Kellen Trade Union kept listening posts along the human border, and its systems flagged the impossible fold signatures rising out of a system that was supposed to be empty. An analyst filed an alert, and it climbed the chain, the way strange things climb, slowly and then all at once. The Ilari Survey Guild caught the energy bloom of 44 drives spinning up together and sent it to their science directorate, with a note that said only, "We have not seen a human fleet of this size before," and the open channel monitors of the Compact of Worlds, which tracked large military movements under the non-escalation accords, logged the departure and generated an automatic query to human diplomatic channels, asking the fleet's nature and destination as the protocol required. The query sat unanswered for 40 minutes before a human attaché named Iris Naidu sent back her reply. She cited an article of the Accords, a subsection, a single paragraph 3 sentences long that humanity had insisted upon during the drafting 21 years earlier, and that most of the other delegations had barely glanced at. It said that in the event of an unprovoked armed attack upon a human civilian installation, resulting in loss of life, the human government reserved the right to respond with proportional and necessary force without prior notice to the Compact, that the nature and scale of that force would be decided solely by human military command, and that this provision superseded all requirements of notification and approval. Most of the delegates who read Naidu's reply had to go and find the paragraph. They had forgotten it was there. When they found it and read it, the chamber on the station called the Threshold went very quiet. Serevan received 2 things in the same short window: the Compact alert and an urgent private message from a Kellan ambassador named Sethran, flagged at the highest priority, which said only, "Respond to the human ultimatum. Now do not wait." Because there was an ultimatum. It had come in on Earth Command frequencies, time-stamped and verified, and it was not angry, and it was not a list of demands, and it was not a request for talks. It was 8 words. "You have 36 hours to leave your world." Serevan read it twice, then a third time, in case he had missed something. He had not. 8 words. No signature, no title. He stared at it a long moment. Then he laughed. It was the hard, clicking sound of his kind, and he made it aloud so the whole bridge could hear and share it. Because if the High Commander was laughing, then the humans had said something absurd, and there was nothing to fear. 36 hours to leave our world, he said. They want us to evacuate Orexis. Orexis was the 3rd planet of a yellow star, and the Sorvan had held it for 4,000 years. Its orbital defenses alone could stop a human carrier group. Its planetary shield grid had been built and rebuilt across 3 centuries. Orexis had not been successfully attacked in 2,000 years. The notion that humanity, with its little stations and its bread and its schoolchildren, could threaten it was not merely unlikely. It was funny. Serevan sent his reply. It was also brief. Then come, and out on the edge of the Threshold's data, Ambassador Sethran ran the numbers on the human fleet's fold signature against the distance to Orexis, and got a figure, and did not believe it, and ran it again. The second time it came out the same. He looked up from his console into the quiet chamber, and understood that the humans would arrive in a little under 3 hours. 3 hours is a strange length of time. It is too long to hold your breath, and too short to change anything that matters. On the station called the Threshold, Ambassador Sethran spent the first of those hours trying to make 41 delegations understand a single number. "I want to be certain everyone in this chamber sees what we are looking at," he said, and his translation went out in 37 tongues at once, each carrying his exact tone, and his tone was not calm. "This is not a patrol. This is not a response force. This is a fleet of 44 warships, of a class and capability that no intelligence service in this room, including mine, which is among the best you have, had any record of. They came out of a system we believed empty. Their fold signatures exceed what we all agreed was the upper limit of human propulsion. The human government has invoked the Accords and is not required to tell us where they are going, and they have not told us." He let that sit. "But given the timing, and given Bellrock, I think we all know where they are going." A small 4-limbed Ilari delegate raised a flag. "Time to arrival." Sethran looked at his figure again, because the first time he had looked at it, He had assumed an error. There was no error. 3 hours. The word went around the chamber like cold water finding the low places. 3 hours. The Alari repeated it, not as a question, more like someone sounding out a word in a language they did not speak, unsure they had it right. Sethran only nodded. Far from the threshold in the ordinary dock, an escape pod, 4 meters long, drifted with no way to steer. And Private Jonah Vance sat with his back to the curved wall and his knees drawn up and counted the people around him. 11. 3 soldiers, Sergeant Lena Braun among them, a burn along her left forearm bound with a strip torn from her undershirt. 5 civilians, 2 engineers, a lab tech, the woman who had run the Bellrock commissary, and a dockhand whose name Vance did not know. And 3 children from the school, a boy of about 8 and 2 girls 6 and 10 with no parents beside them. The commissary woman had her arm around the youngest, talking low, and the small girl was not crying, but her eyes were very wide and she had not blinked in a long while. The pod had no drive past its launch thrust. It coasted. The beacon put out a low automated pulse on the rescue band, and there was nothing to do but wait and hope the pulse was heard before the air scrubbers finished their cycle, which the little display told Vance would happen in about 61 hours. He had done the arithmetic twice and gotten the same number, and decided a third pass would not improve anything. He kept coming back to Calder's voice. He had heard pieces of the last testimony on his headset before the battery died. That flat, exact narration, the calm of a person who has made peace with a thing and is simply finishing the last tasks in front of her. He had known officers who performed steadiness, who wore it like a uniform because the soldiers needed to see it. Calder had not been performing. That was the part he could not put down. The older girl was watching him with steady dark eyes, the way you watch someone you have decided will tell you the truth. "Help is coming," Vance said. "How do you know?" "Because we sent the signal," he said. "And we don't leave people behind." She thought about that. Then she leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Not because she believed him, Vance thought, but because she had decided to act as if she did, which is a different thing, and in some ways the braver one. He looked at the count again. 11. He held it in his mind like a stone in a pocket. 11 in. He did not let himself finish the thought. On the bridge of his flagship, High Commander Seravan received the compact alert and Sethran's warning in the same 2-minute span, and read them standing very still, with the particular stillness of someone whose confidence has just met something it was not built to hold. 44 ships, 3 hours, a class of vessel no one had on record. "What do we know about this fleet?" he said. His chief tactical officer answered carefully. "Nothing confirmed, High Commander." "The fold signatures are outside our entire database. Their drive capability." He stopped, made the clicking sound that meant recalculation. "Their drive capability is well beyond what our intelligence assessed for human propulsion." Seravan was quiet a moment. Then, in the controlled voice that his rank required, he said, "Alert home defense. Tell them a human fleet is inbound. Bring the full grid online." He did not say what he was thinking. He was a Sorvan commander, and control was expected of him. But the thought was there, cold and honest, in the part of him that had been a military mind before it had been anything else. He had told the humans to come. They had come. They had come with 44 ships that existed in no record, in 3 hours when 3 hours was not possible, without a second ultimatum, without a counteroffer, without any of the long, careful maneuvering that species performed when they meant to threaten and not to act. They had simply come. And that voice in him said, very quietly, "They were ready. They were already ready. They built a thing and hid it, and they have been waiting, not hoping it would never be needed, waiting for someone to give them the reason." Beyond his port, the wreckage of Bellrock still drifted, cooling. He made himself look at it and saw a bent table and a drinking cup and something laminated that might once have been a child's drawing, turning slowly in the silence. He had given them the reason. Orexis brought its grid to full power. 17 shield satellites in a synchronous ring. 42 weapons platforms. 4 permanent defense stations, each one larger than the station Bellrock had been, each one built for war rather than for bread. The grid had stood 300 years and had failed exactly never. And then the humans arrived, and they did not arrive the way ships arrive. Every species dropped out of fold in a stagger, one hull and then another, each needing a breath to steady before the next came through. Human drives had been built to close that window. All 44 ships fell back into ordinary space inside the same 2 seconds, already oriented, already at combat speed, already in formation. The grid registered them the instant they appeared, and opened fire in the first 4 seconds, and what came off those platforms was nothing like what had killed Bellrock. This was planetary fire, the kind built to break fleets, to break invasions, to make any attacker look at the numbers and turn away. It struck the fleet, and on the bridge of the verdict the impact arrived as sound first, a deep, resonant toll moving through the hull like a struck bell. The lights flickered once, then the shields took the rest, and the board showed green across all 44 ships, and the sound faded. Admiral Rowe had not moved from his chair. "Shields at 91%, said his tactical officer, Commander Mei Lin, in the precise, unhurried voice of someone who had run this engagement in simulation 400 times. No hull damage on any ship. The grid fired again, heavier. Rowe felt it as a long, grinding pressure this time, as though the universe itself had leaned against the fleet and asked it to move. 83%, still green across the board. Rowe studied the tactical display, where the 17 satellites hung in their solid ring. Solid except in 3 places, where their coverage overlapped at a slightly mismatched frequency, a calibration quirk left in the system since its last refit and written down in maintenance logs that human intelligence had quietly obtained 12 years before. The Sorvan did not know those points were weak. They were weak only in the exact way the verdict's weapons had been built to exploit. "Navigation," Rowe said. "Take us to position Alpha. All ships follow." The fleet did not charge the grid. It pivoted, a smooth, coordinated turn, all 44 ships moving together with the ease of crews who had run the maneuver so many times that it lived in their hands and not their heads. It swung toward the first of the 3 points in the satellite ring, and as it moved, it kept taking fire, and its shields kept holding, and nothing in the way. Rowe sat in his chair, suggested that any of this was remarkable. The first satellite went down 11 minutes after the fleet arrived. 9 ships hit the calibration point together, a braided sequence of frequencies the satellite's shield had never been tuned to refuse, delivered in an order the Sorvan engineers who built it had never once imagined because no one was supposed to have the numbers. The shield folded inward. Then the satellite itself came apart in a brief bright bloom, and the gap it left in the ring was small, but it was a gap. "First point open," Mei Lin said, moving to Beta. On the nearest defense station, the officer in command was a career soldier named Tescarn, a defense marshal who had held home system posts for 200 years. And she watched the satellite die and understood 3 things at once, each colder than the last. The humans had known about the calibration point, which meant they held intelligence that should not exist. Her grid's return fire was doing almost nothing to their hulls, which meant their shielding ran on principles she did not have in her threat tables. And they were not charging blindly, they were moving to specific points with intent, which meant they had built a plan long before they came, and had brought it with them. Finished. She sent an emergency signal to the High Council on Orexis. "The grid is compromised," it said. "Begin civilian shelter protocols." Then she went on fighting, because she was a career soldier, and that was what career soldiers did. The second satellite took 14 minutes. The third took 9. The human crews were faster with each one, their rhythm set now, their aim sharpened by the data from the ones before. The ring had 3 gaps in it. The defense stations began sliding to cover them, firing without pause, and the verdict took a direct hit from a station-grade cannon that shook the whole ship hard enough to throw 2 crew from their posts. 64%, Mei Lin said, and one of the thrown crew found their feet, got back to the station, said, "Still here," and kept working. "Weapons platforms next," Rowe said. "Priority order. Take them down." The 42 platforms died across the next 18 minutes, and they did not die quietly. They fired until they had nothing left to fire, and several of them landed real hits. 2 human ships fell back with shield failures. 1 sealed a breach in an outer compartment. 1 lost a weapon system offline. But they died in the order Ro's planners had laid out, one after another. And they died. The defense stations lasted longest. They were larger, more heavily shielded, crewed by people who were very good at their work and who fought with the particular ferocity of soldiers standing between the enemy and the place their families slept. Tescan's station was the last of the 4 still firing. She fought it 23 minutes past the others, throwing everything she had at the human ships until her station had nothing more to throw. And when it was over, her station was crippled and drifting, and her crew was alive. The human ships did not finish it. They left it there, dark and powerless and alive. That detail was noted by everyone who ever studied the engagement. 27 minutes after the Keystone fleet fell out of fold, the grid was gone. No shield ring, no platforms, no stations that could answer. The planet below hung naked in the dark. From orbit, Orexis was beautiful. Its thick atmosphere glowed a warm gold against the black, and its continents ran in hard angular shapes, less curved than Earth's, like the Sorvan themselves. But the oceans were the same blue-black that oceans are everywhere, and the cloud patterns moved the way cloud patterns move on any world that has weather, and from up here it looked like every other place that a great many people call home. Ro looked at it for a long moment. Then he opened a channel, not to the crippled stations, not to Seravan's fleet, which was still out at the border beside the wreckage of Belrock, hours from home and about to find an empty socket where its defenses used to be, not to any military channel at all. He opened the widest civilian band the Sorvan used, the one that carried public broadcast to every receiver on the planet, and he spoke in Galactic Common, slow and clear. People of Orexis, my name is Admiral Nathan Ro of the Human Keystone Fleet. 41 hours ago, your government attacked a human civilian outpost called Belrock. 612 people lived there. Your government sent 188 warships against 40 soldiers and a station built for science and for families. He paused. We gave your government 36 hours to leave this world. That offer was made in the hope that they would use it. They did not. What happens next is the consequence of what was done at Belrock. I am sorry for what I am about to do. I am not sorry for doing it. He closed the channel. Sir, said Lieutenant Commander Idris Vale, his communications officer. He was young, 26, and there was something in his voice that was not quite an argument and not quite a question and was trying to be neither. Sir, there are 3 billion people on that planet. I know, Ro said. Below them, in the golden light, 3 billion people who had not ordered anything, who had not voted for Seravan, who had simply woken that morning on the planet where they had always lived, went about the business of a day that was not going to end the way any of them expected. And somewhere among them a low analyst's warning, 4 cycles old and waved off twice, was about to come true at a scale that not even Varun had let himself imagine. Vale swallowed and did not sit down. The weapon, he said. Ro looked at him. It targets the planetary core. I know what it targets, Lieutenant Commander, Ro said. The cascade takes 7 hours. 7 hours from the moment we fire. He let that land. The Sorvan Imperium has emergency evacuation ships that can lift 200,000 people an hour. In 7 hours, if they begin now, they can move well over 1 billion to the outer system. He turned back to the display. We gave them 36 hours and they chose not to use them. The moment the weapon fires, a 7-hour clock begins, and what they do with it is their choice. Vale was quiet. I need you at your station, Ro said. Not because I'm ordering you, because I need you. Vale sat down. Across the fleet, a single coded transmission went out from the verdict to the other 43 ships. 2 words long. Weapon ready. On each of the 12 vessels built for this one purpose, a system that had never run outside a test began its initialization. The weapon was not a missile, and it was not a beam. It was a gravitational resonance emitter, a thing that, aimed at a planetary core, began a cascade in the world's own inner structure, a reaction that fed on itself like a fire given fuel, until the core could no longer hold its shape. It was not a clean death for a world. Nothing about it was clean, but it was slow by design. Slow enough that the people on the surface would feel the first tremors, would read the changes on their instruments, would understand what was happening, and would have hours to run. It was not mercy, exactly. It was the least that a man like Roe could offer. And still, barely, sleep. He thought about Naomi Calder. He had never met her. He had only listened to a recording, a voice steady as its walls came down, and he had known the kind of soldier she had been. He thought about a school with 24 children in it at the edge of everything. He thought about 8 words he had sent, and 2 words that had come back. Then come. Weapons, he said, in the same voice he always used. Confirm targeting. Malin ran the check. Targeting confirmed. Core, resonance lock on all 12 emitters. Firing solution is clean. On my mark. Outside the port. Orexis glowed gold in the dark, old and full of people who were not soldiers, most of whom had never ordered anything at all. I wish you had left, Roe said. Then, mark. 12 emitters fired at once. There was no beam, no light, no thunder. The systems simply activated, and somewhere far below, the golden surface, in the iron heart of the world, something began that would not stop. The clock started. 7 hours. Roe did not look away. All ships begin recording, he said. Full sensor logs from this moment forward. Every ship. He paused. The galaxy needs to see what this costs. Both sides. Below them, Orexis began to shake. The tremors started small. The way the first sign of a thing gone deeply wrong always starts small. A shudder in a floor. A rattle in a wall. A sound too low to hear that could be felt in the chest. In the cities, instruments caught the core fluctuation within minutes, and the science directorate sent its alerts, and the government, already in crisis session over Tescarn's signal, was told what it already half knew. They had heard Roe on the civilian band, in plain galactic common, and even if they had not, the readings told the same story in a language no government could spin. The core temperature was climbing in a pattern that did not occur in nature. Whatever the humans had fired had found the thing it was looking for, and it was not stopping. 7 hours. The government activated the evacuation fleet. Ships never meant for this. Cargo haulers and passenger liners and government transports and military supply vessels, all of them redirected and filled and thrown skyward. The spaceports became a thing that is hard to describe and harder to watch. 3 billion people, and the ships could lift a fraction of them. Parents made choices no parent should ever make. The young were sent first, then the old, and within the first hour the order broke down into the only rule left, which was that whoever could reach a ship should reach a ship. The Sorvan were not a species given to open grief. Their culture prized restraint, the bearing of hard things without display. But the spaceports of Orexis that day held none of that restraint, and the recordings that survived showed the thing that looks the same in every species, in every tongue, on every world. People holding on to each other in the last moments before separation and not wanting to let go. The evacuation ships rose in streams, thousands of them, and the ones that could not fold, that could only reach the outer system, filled their holds and turned away from the world shaking beneath them. In 7 hours, they lifted 340 million people. 2,660,000,000 did not make it off the planet. Roe watched the evacuation from the bridge of the verdict. He watched every ship that rose, and he counted them, not because the count changed anything, but because he believed a person should know exactly what he was responsible for. He watched the streams climb away, and he watched the readings show, the cascade deepen, the core temperature climb, the seismic line spread from the equator outward. At the 4-hour mark, the surface began to change where you could see it. The golden atmosphere thickened. Eruptions opened along 3 great fault lines at once, slow at first, then not. The equatorial oceans began to behave wrongly, their tides disrupted, their temperatures rising. The deep water starting to do what deep water does when the heat beneath it turns wrong. At the 5-hour mark, Mei Lin set down her tablet and did not pick it up again. Idris Vale had not spoken in 2 hours. The bridge was very quiet. Nothing in it but the automated systems and the low sound of the recordings running on every ship. At 5 hours and 41 minutes, the Cascade reached the point Rose engineers had called the threshold, the moment past which the reaction was self-sustaining and nothing anywhere could stop it. He had known this moment would come. Knowing did not make it easier to sit through. He sat through it. At 6 hours and 2 minutes, Orexis began to end. Not in an explosion, not the way planets die in old entertainment, with a fireball and a satisfying flash. The core gave way from the inside and the world came apart over the course of 43 minutes. The way things come apart when the thing holding them together simply stops. The surface cracked first, then the interior. The atmosphere scattered. The oceans, what was left of them, fell away in pieces. And the pieces spread, and in 43 minutes, there was no Orexis. There was a field of debris in the orbit of a yellow star, where a world had turned for 4,000 years. Ro looked at it for a long time. Then he stood and straightened his uniform and spoke to his crew. Log time of completion. Prepare the full engagement record for transmission to Earth Command and the Compact of Worlds. All logs, all recordings, unedited. He paused. Every ship, make sure your crews have access to medical and counseling support. Starting now, not when we get home. Now. He looked around the bridge, at Mei Lin, at Vale, at the others who had sat there and done the thing they had trained for. You served well. Every one of you. What we did today will not leave us, and it should not. But we did not start this, and there was no version of it without cost. Remember that. No one spoke. He sat back down and began to write his report, and his hand was very steady. Far out at the border, beside the cooling wreckage of Bell Rock, Saravan's fleet finished its work and turned for home. It fell out of fold at the edge of the Orexis system, expecting to find a system, and found a star and a debris field and 44 human warships sitting in the space where the orbital grid had been, running dark, not firing, not advancing. Just there, waiting. Saravan stood at his port for a very long time. His bridge crew said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The readings were clear. The composition of the debris was clear. The timeline was clear. He had sent 188 ships against a station, with 40 soldiers and a bread oven to draw a line. And humanity had answered by folding to the center of Sorvan civilization and ending it in 27 minutes of fighting and 7 hours of consequence. He thought about the 8 words. You have 36 hours to leave your world. He had laughed at him. He had sent back 2 words, then come. And in the ruined quiet of his mind, those 2 words came back to him now. And they did not sound like strength anymore. He looked at the debris field where Orexis had been, where 2 centuries of his own life had been built, where his family had lived, where the oldest Sorvan city had stood since before humanity had learned to work iron. And he sat down. It was not a dignified sitting. It was the sitting of a thing whose legs have stopped working beneath it. His communications officer said, very quietly, "High Commander, the human fleet is hailing us." Saravan did not move for a moment. Then, "Put it through." Ro's voice came through, and it was not angry, and it was not triumphant. It was the same voice that had spoken to the civilians of Orexis, level and tired and carrying the full weight of what it said, without hiding from any of it. "High Commander Saravan, I am transmitting the coordinates of your evacuation fleet. They are in the outer system. They are unharmed. We did not touch them." A pause. "Go to your people. What you do next is your decision. We will not pursue." The channel closed. Saravan sat in the silence, somewhere behind his sternum, the part of him that had been a military mind before. It had been anything else tried to make the transmission fit into a shape it understood, and could not. This was not how war was done. You did not end a world and then hand its killers the map to their own survivors. You did not spare the crippled station and let the pods run and give a doomed planet 7 hours you were not obliged to give. There was no advantage in any of it. He had built his whole life on the certainty that power spent itself on advantage, and he was looking at a species that had spent none of it, and he understood, too late to matter, that he had never known what he was dealing with. "Set course for the outer system," he said, and his voice was something he did not recognize. "Take us to our people." The fleet turned away from the debris field and moved. The Compact of Worlds received the full engagement record, 12 hours after Orexis was gone. Every log, every sensor file, every second of the verdict's bridge recordings. The chamber met an emergency session, all 41 species present, and Ambassador Sethran had not slept. He had watched it live off the Kellen listening posts, the grid falling in 27 minutes, the evacuation ships rising, the debris field forming. He had been awake for 31 hours, and he was not the only one. He stood at the central podium and looked at the room. Some of the delegations there had been weighing, in the quiet way that species weigh things they do not say aloud, exactly how far humanity could be pushed. Some had disputes with human colonies. Some had been watching the Sorvan situation and doing arithmetic of their own. Now they had their answer. "I prepared a formal statement," Sethran said. "I have reviewed it 6 times, and I am satisfied that it is accurate and complete." He looked down at his notes. Then he set them aside. "I am going to say it simply instead." He looked at the room. "Do not attack humanity's people. Do not attack their stations, their ships, their colonies, their civilians, or their interests." He paused. They gave the Sorvan 36 hours. Then they gave a dying planet 7 more that they did not owe. They are not impulsive. They are not aggressive. They have never expanded into space that was not unclaimed. And in all of their history, they have never once started a war. He let it sit. But they finish what is begun against them. Whatever they are, and I am no longer certain any of us understood what they are, they finish it, and they do not forget. He picked up his notes and stepped back. "I have nothing further." The chamber was quiet a long time. No one else came to the podium. A rescue vessel found Vance's pod 51 hours after it launched, one of 36 pods it recovered, inside a 10-hour window, sent out from the nearest human colony the moment the beacons were flagged. Most of the people in the pods were alive. Not all. The children were all alive. When the crew cracked the hatch, the first thing Vance did was check the count. 11 in. He stood in the airlock and confirmed it with his own eyes, 1 through 11, before he let himself breathe all the way down. 11 out. Brown came behind him, her arm properly bandaged now, walking off on her own feet. The ship's doctor tried to get them both to sit. Vance sat. Brown did not. They were given food and water and blankets, and Vance ate his ration without tasting it. And the older girl from the school sat beside him and ate hers without speaking. And that was fine. Some things do not need words. An officer came to give them the situation report, careful with it, using the clear, plain language people use when the news is too large for softer words. She told them what had come down from Earth Command. The Keystone Protocol. The Keystone Fleet. Orexis. When she finished, the compartment was silent. Vance thought about Bell Rock, about the smell of bread in the mornings, about Calder at the comm panel with her voice steady as the walls came down, about 40 soldiers and a station full of people who had done nothing but live at the edge of human space and call it home. He thought about a planet that no longer existed. He thought about how both of those things could live inside the same sentence. He did not have a name for what he felt. It was not satisfaction. It was not quite grief, though grief was in it. It was something heavier than either, that did not resolve into anything he could name and set down. 612 people, he thought, and Calder had said it. This is a message, and it has already been sent. He understood now what she had meant, not just the beacon, not just the sensor data. She had meant that the last thing any of them at Bell Rock could do was make certain that what happened to them meant something, that it was not only an ending, that it went somewhere. It had gone somewhere. The girl beside him had finished her ration. She was looking at the port, at the stars. "What happens now?" she said. Vance looked at the stars with her. "We go home." And then he thought about it honestly, about a galaxy that had just watched 44 ships take apart a planetary grid in less than half an hour and end a world in 7, about 41 delegations sitting in a chamber with their notes put away and nothing left to say about a debris field where a homeworld had turned in the orbit of a yellow star, about the fact that humanity had not fired first, had not expanded into claimed space, had not built its fleet to conquer anything at all, but had built it quietly and hidden it patiently on a moon no one had mapped, and kept it ready, and hoped, with the particular hope of people who understand history, that it would never be needed, and then had used it completely, without hesitation, with exactly as much warning as it had promised, and not 1 minute more. "And then we keep going," Vance said. "That's what we do. We keep going." She thought about that. It seemed to be enough. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, and the stars kept moving past the port. Out in the outer system of a yellow star, a fleet of Sorvan evacuation ships drifted in the cold and looked at the space where their world had been. 340 million survivors. The beginning of something that would take generations to become a civilization again. And among them, on a crowded transport, a low analyst named Varun stood at a viewport and looked at the debris, and did not say "I told you so," because there was no one left who needed telling. He had warned them. He had survived. He would spend the rest of his long life as the one Sorvan who could stand before the compact and say what humanity was, and be believed. In time, he would be the one who carried the first careful word back across the dark, toward New Lucerne. Not as surrender, but as the slow beginning of something that was not war. He did not know that yet. He only stood at the port, and watched, and understood. The galaxy stayed quiet after that, for a long time. Not because the other species had nothing to say, but because they had seen a thing that changed how they understood the young species, with the round ships and the fast drives and the bread baked at the edge of their space. They had seen that humans were patient, that humans were restrained, that humans built and expanded and negotiated and kept their worst weapons hidden in the dark for years, hoping the day would never come. And they had seen what happened when someone made the day come. Humanity was not the largest species in the galaxy, not the oldest, not the most advanced, not the most feared before that day. But when you hurt their people, they came. They came from a moon no one had mapped, in ships no one had counted, at a speed no one had believed possible, with weapons no one had known existed. They came, and they did not stop. That was enough. That was more than enough.